This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson.
Insert Democrat socialist here.
Runs the Democratic House floor for 30 plus years running. He's promising this and he's stealing that. Where can you get that kind of money? He's using your house like his own piggy bank. You ought to know by now. You can pay off your house here in Illinois, but you can never keep up with the taxes. Oh, how it's always been the plan to have a taxpayer pay, no doubt. Not a matter of if anymore, but when you're moving out.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. That theme music means it's time for our weekly confab with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints.org, all things Illinois policy related. And BLM Brandon did a sit-down with animatronic Fox News propaganda reader Scott Schneider, who is, I think, taking the lead in the balloting for Journalist of the Year, according to the CTU Journalist of the Year.
Kind of reminds me of a common day anchorman. I'm the anchorman.
Yes. Scott Schneider serving as essentially a prompt for Brandon to give his stock answers on matters that were addressed. Public safety wasn't one of them. He only had 11 minutes.
I mean, how could you forget to bring that up? You must not live in the city.
But he did address the sanctuary city status, because actually there's a movement afoot, even among some aldermen, Ray Lopez, to rescind Chicago's sanctuary city status. And here's what BLM Brandon had to say about that.
Well, as I've said repeatedly, Chicago maintaining its status as a welcoming city is an important part of our tradition and our history. Many people know that 40 years ago that Mayor Harold Washington declared the city of Chicago to be sanctuary. And I'm grateful for that leadership, because had it not been for that movement a generation ago, we would not be positioned to be the welcoming space for families who were seeking refuge, like my family, who came up during the second migration from the South, Salis, Mississippi, and families who are coming up from Central and South America. Look, it's going to take all of us to address this humanitarian dynamic, the state, the county government, as well as the city government. Now, what I'm encouraged by is that we do have a real strong collaboration here in the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, Cook County government, pushing the federal government to provide more support for families. We're going to need it.
Yeah, also, Harold Washington had made it safe for men to wear women's lingerie.
Okay.
So that was important as well 40 years ago. Such an impact. Related story, the FBI is reportedly scrambling to find more than a dozen Uzbek nationals who sought asylum in the U.S. earlier this year after intel officers discovered they traveled to the southern border with the help of a smuggler who has ties to ISIS. A humanitarian crisis, in part, and not in other part. Officials are working to identify and assess all the individuals who gain entry into the country, according to a National Security Council spokeshuman. Well, that's wonderful. Meanwhile, in Chicago, we're willy-nilly setting up migrant centers, 15 of them around the city, in order to just concede the fact that migrants are here and they are to be provided all the creature comforts and also access to CPS classrooms, no vaccine required. That's what's happening here. He was asked about CPS briefly. The poor reading and math proficiency scores you've seen if you've read Wirepoints.org's reporting on CPS's academic performance. And this answer is going to sound very much like the answer you just heard from migrants, because that's the answer he has for every issue.
Well, here's the thing that's important. We have to make sure that we are making the critical investments so that our children's learning and development is fully realized. Now, look, as someone who was taught reading, I understand the importance and the value of being able to draw conclusions, figure out what a comma splice is, and of course, figure out what the main ideal of a story is. It's difficult to do that when you have the type of poverty that exists in the city of Chicago. I can tell you firsthand, when a child is coming to school hungry, they're not necessarily interested in the 5 causes of the American Revolution, as much as that might excite you and I. But if you have not had stable housing, 65,000 families that are unhoused, of which 20,000 of them are children, and that's why we worked with the expediency over the first 100 days to create a pathway to bring Chicago home, a dedicated revenue stream that's going to provide revenue to support the unhoused, treatment, not trauma, that's going to make sure that we have mental health support that's available for our young people and their families. And so math scores, reading scores, in order for those scores to actually improve, we have to make sure we improve the living and the working conditions of our families. And unless we're committed to that type of investment, it will be hard pressed to see the type of results that the people of Chicago expect.
Scott Schneider had a follow-up to that statement. What was the American Revolution? Brandon Johnson's answers, collaboration, spending, work, and home life. Interesting. A follow-up by somebody who had firing synapses might be, really, can you explain why Chicago Hope Academy on the city's south side produces one result with the 100% minority kids under its charge, and its neighboring CPS schools produce something very different and substantially subpar? Can you explain that? Same kids from same neighborhoods, different outcomes from this school, Chicago Hope Academy, for example, and all those CPS schools you're want to tout. No, but those are the kind of impertinent questions that don't get asked. Brandon Johnson's goal over the next 100 days. He's got 100 days under his belt. Public safety related, K through 12 related. No, you heard it.
What?
Spend related. He's got a lot of spending he wants to do.
I really believe that the number one goal, though, over the next 100 days is to really create a budgetary process that is fully inclusive. Now, I'm going to pass my first budget in just a few more months. But I want to make sure that everyone knows that they are fully heard, and that includes our young people, every single older person, the interests of the city of Chicago, we get to have on full display. And so to pass a budget that is centered around building a better, stronger, safer Chicago in a collaborative way, that is my number one goal over the next 100 days.
That's
bingo.
Wonderful.
I got the bingo.
There's no better kind of budget than an inclusive budget. Ted
Better, stronger,
Dabrowski.
safer to Chicago.
Ted Dabrowski is president of Wirepoints.org. Ted, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
Inclusive budget means, everybody who needs to get cut in gets cut in so that we can keep this little racket running.
Well, yeah, usually all the budgets are, exclusive. It's hard to know what all that means. I tell you, it's a really interesting to listen to him, and we happen to run a whole bunch of numbers the last few days about Illinois is the most, you could argue, the most equity-driven, progressive, right? We have competition with California, whatever, New Jersey. But it is about as inclusive, about as progressive, about as equity-obsessed as any other state in the country. And yet when you look at all the data, it is undeniably now that I've looked at it, especially for blacks, undeniably one of the worst places for them to live. And I'm talking about income, I'm talking about poverty, I'm talking about school results. It's an absolute failure. And the thing about what Brandon Johnson is doing is he's trying to take it even further to the left, even further progressive, when it's already been destructive. So it's really sad. I mean, if you look at this, the unemployment rate in Chicago for blacks, highest in the country. If you look at the gap between whites and blacks on poverty, the gaps between blacks and whites on incomes, it's phenomenal. What a failure, our governments have done. And so to hear him say all that stuff, it's really, I don't know how to say it right now, but it's really ugly. It's really ugly.
Has he accomplished anything in the first 100 days?
No, I don't see it. I've looked at the numbers. The bad guys are figuring out, hey, they're smart. They figure out, well, we can't do. Why do hijackings? We're going to do less hijackings. We're going to steal more cars because it's easy. And you know what? It's easy to take these stolen cars and drive around different neighborhoods because they won't chase us anymore. They won't do foot chases or car chases. So we can literally go to 10 or 15 or 20 different neighborhoods and do robberies and get away with it. And that's why we're seeing a spike in robberies now. Out of nowhere, we got like a 50% spike in the last couple of months.
Yeah,
So,
well, that's the
he's
fault
done
of
nothing about that.
that's the fault of Kia and Hyundai.
Yeah, and it just like he sues Kia, he sues Hyundai because they are not protecting their cars, keeping them from being stolen, as opposed to blaming the criminals. And I'm wondering whether he's a step away from suing parents because their kids can't read and write. He's got to be a step away from that. So I don't see what he's done on anything, frankly. He's stuck on his finances. He keeps talking about investments, but it's going to be really hard for him to pass tax hikes. So it's going to be an interesting situation for the next 100 days. But I see nothing but more of the same. He's got those canned lines of what he says, and he says it over and over, and it's not very nuanced. There's not a whole lot of thinking behind them. They just seem very canned.
They're like it's hypnotic. You just say collaboration and investing, and you just use all these
work together.
Mellifluous words that sound unity oriented and collaboration oriented, and the kids and families and a bigger, better, banger, build back something.
No,
I mean,
it's a bigger, better, stronger, safer Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, it's just blah 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 blah. I mean, it's one automaton in the Chicago media talking to another one in the mayor's office.
And I think his words are even worse than that. They're really dangerous. If you think about crime, right? We've talked about it a lot. He excuses crime all the time. He's always making an excuse for the silly kids. They're young. Everything's racist. Those kind of things. That's one. And then in the schools, the more and more he does this blaming. Look, there's no denying that many of these kids come from very troubled households. There's no denying that. But by using the words that he does, he's always excusing all teachers, the entire system, because now they can all say, we can't educate these kids because look at their problems. And so my view, and I get this from looking at the stuff in Peoria and Decatur, is everybody's forget teaching. We're no longer places of education. We are now, our goal is to take care of the whole child, and that means nothing in the end. But it certainly means that they've stopped. They're not responsible anymore for those reading and math results because they don't have to be.
Well, I mean, here again, you document this over at Wirepoints. The city's budget, I don't know if this is just adjusted for inflation, but it's increased by 50% over the last 4 years. And so what have we got for that extra almost $6 billion in spend in the last 4 years? We get more politicians spewing more rhetoric saying we need more.
Yeah, and it's not adjusted for inflation. That's just the big number, right? So we're spending about $10.7 billion in Chicago in 2019 when Lightfoot's first year. Now we're spending almost $6 billion more. That's more than the full budget for Dallas. So in 4 years, Chicago now has almost the Dallas equivalent to spend in addition to what it was spending before, and nobody really understands. Even we don't. I mean, there's so much money that flowed through because of COVID, because of all the handouts that went everywhere. That I'd say the budget's bastardized, but it's got $6 billion more in it. And granted, some of that was used for COVID stuff, right? Maybe some of it, of course, was legitimate, even though most of it was done by the government's own lockdowns. But now it's hard to understand. He's asking for more money. He keeps saying, "I need this money and that money and investment," and it's going to come from taxpayers. He's going to try to get the rich, but what the poor need to understand is even if he does go after the rich, well, the rich will leave, as we see.
Yeah, or they fire you because they have to. I mean, we mentioned this anecdote from a City Journal piece by Bryce Hill, The Tax in Town, talking about Chicago. During the past decade, Chicago's commercial property taxes have jumped 93%. Cook County business owners in north and northwest suburbs saw a 134% increase in property tax hikes over the past 20 years, from 12.2 to 28.7. Commercial property tax hikes in south and southwest suburbs not far off, and of course the Southland is a demilitarized zone in large measure because of the property tax classification system in Cook County. But here's just an anecdote to make it concrete. The Marinos family, owners of Belmar Wire Products in Bucktown, immigrants who build a stable family-owned manufacturing firm. In December 2022, they were ambushed by a 400% in property tax hike. 400%, 4x. Their massive tax bill forced them to let half of their workforce go. Aliki Marinos, we just went through COVID, closures, price increases, surges of gas, of food, insurance costs, short labor supplies. We feel like you're kicking us out, like you don't want us here, like you want us to fail. That's what it seems like. We love the city. We just need it to love us back. Well, that love is going to be unrequited in this administration.
Yeah, Bryce does a good job of covering that, and it's the same story we hear. We go around everywhere. People are they're flabbergasted. These like restaurant owners and all that. It's really hard, and you've seen prices go way up. They're trying to pass it on to consumers. The question is, can they successfully do that? And it's only a matter of time. Again, Johnson talked about the Great Migration and this family moving here. The sad part is that the Great Migration is unwinding itself as blacks in large numbers.
Yeah.
Tens of hundreds of thousands are going back to Houston, are going back to Dallas. And, if Johnson wants to celebrate his family moving here, he should be doing everything he can to keep them here. But, he's not, he doesn't realize, he doesn't care, whatever we want to say. He's chasing people out. He's going to chase more and more people out.
And if you're looking from any help at the top, Governor Spalding, he's too busy flacking for the big guy in D.C. and preparing for the DNC. He's taken the same approach this year since his reelect that he took in his first term, which is stay away from Chicago. Don't make Chicago my problems.
Yeah, he's been really good at that. I always say that Pritzker's really good at all this stuff, but he's able to deflect and Teflon. Chicago, is always Lightfoot's problems, even though many of his own laws and much of what he does, make Chicago worse. But he's been really good at that.
Ted Dabrowski, President of Wirepoints, wirepoints.org, all things Illinois policy related. Ted, thanks as always.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Balance of Nature's fruits and vegetables in a capsule, changing the world one life at a time.
I'm a professional tree climber. That's what I do for a living. And I'm just hopped up with this energy. Loved it. I want to keep those Balance of Nature